Today we're going to have a look at Psalm 62. What I thought we could do is we could read the psalm together in two halves of the room. So from Jane and me, that way, you'll say the screens that are green, and then that way, you will say the next screens, which are a kind of bluey colour. Very pretty. Now, the only trouble with doing this when we read in together is that you're more interested in what you're going to say next than actually reading what's being said. So, try and rest and relax a bit. Just let this absorb you, because it's a fantastic psalm. So, Jane and me, and this side will start. Truly, my soul finds rest in God. My salvation comes from him. Truly, he is my rock and my salvation. He is my fortress. I will never be shaken. How long will you assault me? Would all of you throw me down, this leaning wall, this tottering fence?
Surely they intend to topple me from my lofty place. They take delight in lies. With their mouths they bless, but in their hearts they curse. Yes, my soul finds rest in God. My hope comes from him.
Truly, he is my rock and my salvation. He is my fortress. I will not be shaken. My salvation and my honour depend on God. He is my mighty rock, my refuge. Trust in him at all times, ye people. Pour out your hearts to him, for God is our refuge.
Surely the lowborn are but a breath, the highborn are but a line. If laid on a balance, they are nothing. Together they are only a breath. Do not trust in extortion, or put vain hope in stolen goods. Though your riches increase, do not set your heart on them.
One thing God has spoken, two things I have heard. Power belongs to you, God, and with you, Lord, is unfailing love, and you reward everyone according to what they have done. Well done, everyone. That was fabulous. That was fabulous. I just love this. I love all the Psalms, actually. Well, most of them. The ones of Asaph are a bit moany, aren't they? I don't know whether you've read some of those. They're a bit like, But this one, purportedly, was written by David. And it's a beautiful song, because I don't know about you, I'm not sure whether you're into poetry or not. And I never was. I always thought that some forms of poetry were a bit kind of annoying, and I didn't understand a lot of it. However, as I've got older, I've started to appreciate poetry a bit more. And it's in our lives more than we ever think. And like I say, the Psalms are both poetry, songs, prayers. They're just full of everything, the Psalms are. But this, I think, is like a sort of a song and a poem. And like I say, when I was a kid, I didn't really appreciate poetry much. However, I did remember that I did have poetry around me when I was a kid, when I was a child. Now, at the tender age of 43, no, I'm not, I'm 65, I remembered that when I was quite young, at secondary school, I had an autograph book. And I found it out the other day. And some of the things in here is quite embarrassing, really. But I've got John Conte, the boxer's autograph in here, and a lady called Rachel Hayhoe Flint, who was yeah, you remember her? Well, yeah, and both of those people, and also a man called Larry Martin, who you might not know, but he was Mr. Mash in Are You Being Served, and he was a good friend of my dad's. But that's by the by. That's me claim to. That's about my only claim to fame, that I've got John Conte's autograph in here.
But I've got some poems that my friends wrote and some of my family. And some of them are quite profound. I want to tell you, Jane was a colleague of mine in the police force. Got on really well with Jane. So I said, will you fill in my autograph book? Because there was 4 of us sharing a house at one time, 3 of us. And she said, yeah. So she was there for ages writing in my autograph book. And when I had a look, she'd written this lovely poem. I saw a little worm a-wriggling on its belly. I bent to have a look at it and squashed it with me welly. And there was another one in there. Now, I thought my mum had written this, but actually when I went to look, it wasn't. It was a friend of mine from school. And she wrote, they walked down the lane together. The sky was covered in stars. They reached the gate in silence. He lifted for her the bars. She neither smiled nor thanked him, because she knew not how. For he was just a farmer's boy, and she was a dairy cow. So you've got the kind of level now of poetry that I grew up with. But do you know what? Those were written when I was a youngster, and I still remember them. I think some of it is a bit of a gift because I can do monologues and things like that from many years ago. I'm sure you know the Lion and Albert. Well, I can recite the Lion and Albert from memory. But that's the whole point of the Psalms, is that if you knew them that well, you could recite them from memory. And in times of trouble or in good times, you could recite the Psalms. And, do you know, people in Old Testament days, they knew the scriptures by heart. And in New Testament days as well, they knew the scriptures by heart. I'm not sure if any of you grew up learning something by rote that still stays with you now. But that's how it was with the Psalms. People had these songs and this poetry, and it was used all the time. And it was for people to remember and recite. Thankfully, they're not humorous ditties like in my autograph book, but they're heartfelt truths. Heartfelt truths. And they were written to express joy and pain and grief, but also happiness, but also anger and frustration and hope, and a reminder that God cares for us and God is the one in whom we should trust. In God we trust. The Americans still have that on their seal. In God we trust. Now, obviously, David wrote this psalm when things were not going smoothly, and it appears that people around him were planning his downfall. It must have been really tough being a king. Every morning I follow the daily readings, and also there's an explanation. I've got this wonderful app, and today it was talking about David as the politician and, you know, not just being the king, but trying to keep everybody pleased and happy, and, you know, things going on around him and stuff like that. Well, the same is happening here in this psalm. You know, things are going round him, but despite all the tensions and all the troubles that are surrounding David, he encouraged the listener, and also, no doubt by writing the psalms down, encouraged himself to trust in him at all times. Because that's what that psalm said. That's what we read. Trust in him at all times, you people. Pour out your hearts to him, for God is our refuge. And that's the truth that was written into those psalms that we're saying, you know, centuries later. Trust in him at all times, you people. Pour out your hearts to him, for God is our refuge. Now, this is a time where things can get a bit preachy, but hopefully not, because for me, it's hard to do that, to trust in God in all times. And sometimes this description of a tottering fence and a leaning wall is how I feel. I'm not sure if you feel like that, but it really speaks to me, that tottering fence and the leaning wall. And I feel a bit like that sometimes. And I know I should trust in God in all things. But at 3 o'clock in the morning when I'm awake and I'm thinking about things that I can't really change at 3 o'clock in the morning, but my brain won't switch off. To trust in God at all times is sometimes very hard. But this tottering fence and this leaning wall image, I love that. And it made me think, well, what makes walls lean and what makes fences totter? So I looked it up. I DuckDuckGo'd it. It didn't quite sound the same as Googled it, does it? But I don't use Google, I use DuckDuckGo. So I DuckDuckGo'd it and said, what makes walls lean and fences totter? And there's all sorts of reasons. There's lots and lots of reasons. It won't build properly in the first place, or, whatever, the weather, the tree roots, warp materials. But the biggest reason of all that your fence will lean or your wall will totter is there was poor ground or a lack of care. Now, that translates very well into our faith life, isn't it? Jesus' parable talks about the wise and the foolish builder. And he was saying, what it's built of, what ground it's built on, is what you'll end up with the finished article. So to lean on God and to trust him for every part of our lives gives us a firm ground to start on. Now, I was going to talk about foundations, and then I thought, you know what? It's not right about foundations, because some of us here will have grown up with very poor foundations in our lives. And does that mean then that whatever's built on top of it is not going to be good? The answer to that is no. No, that's not. Whatever your foundations were as a child, or as a youth, or as you're growing up, whatever those foundations were, doesn't mean to say whatever's built on that will be poor. But if you build on the firm ground that is God, if you put your hope in Jesus, then yes, everything will be firm after that. It might be that the very, whatever happened in your life before was not good, but actually, from building from God onwards is the firmest foundation you can get. And that's the start of things. Is to go back and think, right, I'm building my foundation on God. Whatever might have happened to me in my life in the past, this is for God. God is the one who will help me build a great structure in my life. And that just took me on then to about caring for ourselves, to looking after ourselves. We have to look after ourselves. We build our lives on God, on the faith and the trust in God, even if it's hard at times. But then from then onwards, we also have to look after ourselves. And Jesus did the same. He went off. Do you remember? He went off to quiet places. Jesus went off on his own to look after himself, to renew his batteries. And that's what we have to do. And for those of you who've been on the plane, the safety announcement comes on, frightens the life out of you, and tells you if the mask comes down, you put your own mask, you put your own mask on first, and then you help others. And it's that same principle. You've got to look after yourself first, because then when you do, you can look after other people. But you've got to look after yourself to start with. That wall, doesn't need to be tottering. It can be straight, and you can look after others. And that's not self-indulgent, and it's self-care. And it's fuel for the future. I'm delighted to know that Matt and his family have had a good holiday. And I hope they had a relaxing time with his family. Yes, thumbs up there. And also I know that Matt goes away on his own as well, like Jesus did, to reflect and to recharge his batteries. And that's a good example of self-care. He models that really well. I don't think he models it often enough, but he models it really well. Because the life of ministry is hard. And our life of ministry is hard too. But be like Matt, recharge your batteries any more often than he does. It's the same for all of us, So, I have the final picture is this Banksy picture. I love this picture because it's something beautiful coming out of something broken. Can you see how, and I love what Banksy does because he does pick out these amazing things. This wall is very cracked and broken. However, the outcome is beautiful. And that boy is nurturing the ground around him so that it flowers. I just love that image. So remember David's words, King David's words of praise and confidence. Yes, my soul, find rest in God. My hope comes from him. Amen.